A Night on Buddy's Bench by Ira Baumgarten. Story told by Anthony Lopez. Produced and directed by Sharon E. Cooper. Original music and score by Nick Moore. Dedicated to Phil and Esther Baumgarten, two salty sea dogs who provided safe harbor to many travelers on a stormy night. There is an old cedar bench, worn gray by the salt air. It sits on the southern path just above low-lying rocks on a tiny island off the coast of Maine. As you sail south, leaving the harbor, the bench looks like a small hood ornament. Perched patiently, it waits for pilgrims to rest there as they walk around the island. To those in the know, this spot above the rocks is affectionately called Buddy's Bench. It's named after Buddy, who has been coming to the island each July for many years. His wife, an artist, paints seascapes while Buddy sits and reads on his bench each afternoon. What few people know, but don't often speak about, is the rumor of a spirit who is said to inhabit the bench at night and who has been known to speak to souls who stop by to listen. It was after midnight when the old man stepped outside his cabin by the harbor. The cabin sat on the hill above the dock where the path began. He felt the cool breeze. As the moon moved in and out of the clouds, the sky seemed both light and dark at the same time, and he could barely see the outlines of the boats in the harbor as they bobbed up and down like toys in a bathtub. He'd always felt reassured to know that he could go to the bench in the middle of the night if he wanted to, but the old man had never actually walked to Buddy's bench in the dead of night. For 40 years, he just rolled over in his bed and went back to sleep. But tonight was different. Tonight, he was determined to feel his feet on the path, to feel the wind and spray on his face, to smell the sea, taste the salt, and hear the waves as they lapped against the shore. He wanted to be there, to sit and breathe the night air. He wanted to touch the morning dew on the bench. The old man was tentative at first. He imagined his wife's concern and whispered, "Don't worry. I'll be careful." The light on the dock lit his first few steps, but as the light faded, he realized his feet knew the way. He had walked this dirt trail in the light of day hundreds of times. The old man was tired and a little out of breath when the shape of the bench came into view. He rubbed the smooth blue sea glass in his pocket as if it were a set of ancient worry beads. He'd found the glass the first time he walked along this path to the bench and always carried it with him. When he sat down and leaned back against the worn wooden slats, he felt held, as if welcomed by an old friend. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The moon faded behind the clouds and the few stars in the sky disappeared. He couldn't tell if the sigh he heard was his own voice or the ocean receding from the rocks. The fog moved slowly along the rocks up to the bench. He could barely see the beam of the lighthouse on the top of the hill. The fog made him feel as if he should be on night watch to keep the ships from coming too close to the rocks. The old man could sense the temperature drop as the fog engulfed him. As the lines chimed against their masts from the harbor, he heard the cry of a screech owl behind him welcome the darkness. He prepared himself for a long night on the bench. The old man realized that he was surrounded by sounds, surrounded by many shades of gray and black, by the moving fog, and by his memories. He had a little tequila to keep him warm against the dampness. He took out 2 clay shot glasses that he'd brought back from Greece many years ago. He poured a shot of tequila for himself and a second shot that he placed on the empty space next to him. He said to himself, "I may be an old fool sitting out here waiting for a voice in the night." He chuckled and thought, then again, I might just be starting to grow into my wisdom. Suddenly, he heard a sound, or was it the voice? Was it the hoot of the owl? The buoy bell? Or maybe just a seagull crying out? The old man looked into the darkness above the sea and said, "I brought my favorite tequila. It's about time you and I had our tea time together." He heard the voice say, "Okay, my old friend. I've been waiting for you too." His heart raced. He both longed for and dreaded this moment. He made himself breathe slowly. He tried to relax. The fog lifted a bit. The moon appeared between the clouds. He took hold of the arm of the bench and spoke. "Where do we begin?" "That's up to you." He hoped for an answer to a long-held question. Why did he die so young? A swift gust of wind lifted the old man's blue cap from his head. It blew onto the rocks and then into the sea. The zip code of the island was stitched on the front of the cap. He loved that cap. His wife had given it to him. He watched the cap fade into the darkness. His long hair, his marker against time, blew freely in the breeze. Damn. Lately things seem to come and go so quickly. They just don't last. He felt relieved that the voice was just in his head, that he was just waking up in his cabin. He would get up soon, do the exercises he hated, and make his coffee. Suddenly he heard the owl hoot again, and he mumbled out loud, "Oh, I'm not in bed. I'm on Buddy's bench." And the unanswered question echoed in his head. Why did he die so young? He heard the voice in the fog. Why do any of us die when we do? All I know is that when there's loss, we have a chance to feel a shared pain, and that can make our hearts expand. The old man looked at the sky and the sea. He felt reassured. He thought, how strange. You can feel so alone, and yet so connected in the same moment. He could hear the waves coming in and going out. He wondered what force had directed him to Buddy's bench tonight. He turned to where the voice came from, raised his shot glass, took a long sip, nodded, and whispered, "My best friend drowned out there. We were both 19 years old. It never made any sense to me. He was a good athlete. We could work all day, play all night. We thought we were immortal souls in our own little world. But I can tell you now, the most hopeless feeling in my life was when I looked into his casket. When I saw him lying there, I wanted him to be standing outside with me, alive, shooting hoops and looking at girls. It's not fair. It's 70 years later and I still miss him. I could have used his help over the years." The old man's eyes became moist. A rush of wind came up off the sea. A chill rose through the old man's body. He could hear the mast lines off in the distance chiming in unison like church bells afloat. They played the high notes, while the harbor buoys below rocked back and forth in harmony, clanging the low notes. He felt something stir inside. A new thought began to take form. To breathe is to live. It's the greatest blessing we have. He never really understood it until this moment. Breath means life. Life means possibility. Possibility means 1,000 ways to connect to what is around us in any given moment. He said yes to the stars and moon. He said yes to the waves crashing. He said yes to the boats in the harbor, to dolphins he couldn't see jumping, to those asleep across the land, to those he loved, to those yearning, to those who care about our planet, to those in pain, and to all those things he thought he would never do but had done. The old man said yes. The old man stood up to shake the chill out of his bones. He sipped some more tequila. He looked up at the lighthouse beam and across the sea to another island that in the moonlight now appeared as if it were a large old whale surfacing in the sea. His wife died just under a year ago. The week she died, they held hands and counted aloud from 1 to 63 for the years they were married. They had done all they had planned. Her death was a peaceful goodbye. He always thought of him and his wife as two loons in a pond, or like a pair of dolphins swimming in the Keys. They were friends and lovers, travel companions in each other's journeys. She was always with him, and he with her. After she died, they talked often. At least, that's what he imagined. It occurred at all hours of the day and night. Yet, tonight, she was silent. He spoke to his wife, pleading for her to answer him. "Honey, do you hear me? Is this really happening?" He sat, waiting to hear her gentle voice, but all he heard was the sound of the waves hitting against the shore. The night was surrendering as first light began to appear. He felt a light touch on his face. Was it a warm breeze, or was it the spirit getting his attention? "You know, you're a good man. You've loved well and done good work. Now rest here on Buddy's bench. Look at the moon and wait for the morning." The old man felt strange. It wasn't dark anymore. The sun started to rise out of the sea. Talking to the voice now seemed crazy. Was it the voice? Was it his wife talking to him, or was he getting senile? The old man felt unsettled. He wanted to know whether he'd done all he was supposed to do. Had his purpose run its course? Should he throw away his to-do list? He pushed himself off the bench, faced the sea, and screamed, "You've been with me all night. I'm tired. Answer me. What's left for me?" He heard the pines sway behind him, the tide rising against the shore. Then the voice came to him in a slow, clear whisper. "Shh. Just love." The fog began to lift. The old man felt a beam of sunlight on his face. In the distance, he saw the back of a great whale rise from the sea and blow a stream of water into the sky. The ferry blew its horns 3 times, announcing its arrival at the dock. He could see the islanders standing, waving to the passengers on the deck as the boat approached the pier. He looked up and saw a robin with a worm on its way to the nest. He looked to the south and saw the grass bow in the field below as the wind passed over. He sat in silence. He breathed the sea air that he cherished so much. He reached over and picked up the 2 empty shot glasses from the bench and put them in his bag. Then he heard footsteps on the path to the bench. He still wasn't sure if he was truly awake or not. He saw a young man striding toward him. "Is this your hat? I've seen you wearing one like this." The old man saw the muddy cap in his hand. The only number of the zip code he could make out was the number 5. He nodded his head and said, "Yes. Thank you." The young man looked at the old man and said, "I've watched you come here and sit for hours. What have you seen and learned out here?" "I've seen the sun make jewels on the sea. I've seen the fog so thick I was scared to leave the bench." The old man stood up and reached into his pocket, took the blue sea glass, and gave it to the young man. "Anytime you're wishing for the solitude and connection that comes from sitting here, hold this piece of glass. It's helped me." Then he leaned over and whispered in the young man's ear, "Just love." The sun was now higher in the sky. He felt its warmth on his skin. He was satisfied. It had been a long night, but a good one. He brushed the mud off of his cap and put it back on his head. He saluted the bench, said fare thee well to the young man, and started back to his cabin. He thought about his wife once more. He felt her presence behind him. This time, he knew it was her. She whispered, "Watch your step. I love you." The old man tipped his hat and said, "I've always loved you. And I always will." As he walked down the path back to his cabin, the old man gazed over the rocks and sea. The rising sun made a parade of diamonds on the water. He began to sing a song he wrote as a young man. It was a tune he hadn't sung in a very long time. "Oh son, I love you so. I made a deal with you no one knows. If you get up every morning, so will I. If you get up every morning, so will I. Oh son, I love you so." Oh son, I love you so. The sunlight peeked its way through the window at the end of the hallway. It was a little past 6:30 in the morning. The alarm went off in the nurse's station. The monitor signaled that his heart had stopped. There was a "do not resuscitate" order pinned above his bed. When the nurse rushed into the room, the old man was lying still. His brow was smoothed where at last check it had been wrinkled. He had a small smile at the edges of his lips. In his hand, he was holding a crumpled blue cap.